Welcome to this week's episode of Sussex Sport Weekly Podcast. I'm Matt Poll, and this week I'm joined by Brighton Hove writer Frankie, Elliott and Crawley Town expert. Unfortunately, Brighton writer Darren Howard has been ruled out with an 11th hour injury. So this week we're joined by Sussex World's very own John O'Shea, Mr. Versatile himself, Sam Morton, who has covered both Crawley and Brighton and Hove Albion for us this season. So thank you very much for stepping in, Sam. Pleasure to have you. Brighton are going on a European tour. The Seagulls will play European football for the first time in their history following this week's excellent results against Southampton and champions Manchester City. The Seagulls all but secured European qualification with a 3-1 home win over the Saints on Sunday. Albion then rubber-stamped Europa League qualification and sixth place with an entertaining draw against champions Manchester City yesterday evening. We'll look back on a historic week at Brighton Hove Albion and also take a glance at the latest developments at Crawley Town. Starting with Saturday, Frankie, Evan Ferguson's double when a Pascal Gross effort helped Albion on their way to victory over Southampton. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I thought it sort of epitomised the whole Brighton movements in the last sort of 10 years. You feel that they've been knocked back quite drastically and they were facing a massive setback in their ambitions, and they come back even stronger. I think on Thursday night they were well beaten against Newcastle. They looked very leggy. They looked like they were sort of on their last legs. A lot of injuries, a lot of tired bodies, and that led to what was they were outplayed and outscored quite easily in a 4-1 loss. And it's very easy in a situation like that with a performance like that in a game like that to get carried away and start to panic and see overreact. And De Zerbi and the players in the club didn't do that. They saw that they only needed one win from their last three games to guarantee European football, and they saw that especially a game against Southampton, a relegated Southampton at home in front of a boisterous Amex Stadium. That was the opportunity to pick up those 3 points rather than trying to get them at St James's Park. So he started with his strongest team. He said after the game against Newcastle, we'll have our best players out for that game against Southampton. And that is where we expect to get those 3 points. McAllister was back in the side. Levi Colwell was back in the side. And they played so much better. The attack looked so much sharper. They were passing the ball more crisply and more cleanly. And they were 2 goals up in the first half. It was a very professional start to the game and exactly what they were looking for. Had to ride their luck a little bit. Southampton came back into the game. Theo Walcott equalised and was off by just by a hair's breadth. But I think what we saw towards the end of that game was the importance of the experience in the side. Danny Welbeck came on for Evan Ferguson, really shored up the attack, showed a bit of nous to hold the ball up and sort of almost run the clock down in some regards. Obviously, Duncan Veltman at the back, shoring up the defence, and the goal scorer, Pascal Gross, who we'll get into in more detail later. Really well taken finish, showed his coolness and his calmness, which he has personified throughout his time at Brighton. But that finish was exactly what was needed, and it was the 3 points that Brighton required with 2 games to spare. So, like I say, football, I've said so many times in this podcast that football moves extremely quickly, and Brighton have experienced that no more than any other club in the last 2 months. They played games every 3 days, and they've had some great results, followed very quickly by some quite drastically terrible results. And this was another example of that. Newcastle defeat was a disappointing one, and one that could have easily derailed the last 3 games, but they came back 3 days later and put in another impressive performance and thoroughly deserved to get their European qualification.
Following the full-time whistle on Sunday, Brighton players did a lap of honour at the Amex. I think most notably, Seagull supporters serenaded Chelsea loanee Levi Colwell and their World Cup winning midfielder Alex McAllister with chants of "We want you to stay." I know that Roberto De Zerbi has made it quite clear that he'd love to have both players at the club next season. You were at the Amex on Sunday, Sam. Can you see either of those players back at Brighton next season, or did the lap of honour feel more like a farewell from Colwell and McAllister?
I would say in McAllister's case, it was probably a farewell. He's obviously been heavily linked to Liverpool with some obviously reliable transfer sources like Fabrizio Romano reporting that Liverpool are really close to agreeing a deal. But time will tell, obviously, if he does move on. But it does seem that he would be the most likely to move. In terms of Levi Colwell, I think there's more of a chance he could stay. I think he's been sending some hints out this week that he could potentially extend his loan deal or even move to Brighton from Chelsea permanently. And there's a video going around on Twitter of, as you say, obviously, of the fans asking him to stay. And he seems to really enjoy that. And he liked the post on Twitter, which maybe suggests that he could be keen to stay. And it's also been reported today that he's going to take everything into consideration. He loves the Brighton fans. That was on the Athletic, reported by Andy Naylor today as well. So, yeah, definitely, it seems like there's a chance that Colwill could stay. But maybe not so much for McAllister. It seems that he could be off.
Frankie, you're a Chelsea supporter. Where does Levi Colwill figure potentially in Pochettino's plans for next season?
It's hard to see how he does, if I'm being brutally honest. He's clearly an exceptional player. I'm a big fan. He is the much coveted left-sided centre-back, which clubs desire so much, and there are not many around, especially teams that look to play out from the back, which Pochettino will want to do. And he's proven himself to be a top player as well as just being left-footed. But the issue that he will face, along with a number of young Chelsea players this summer, is that this squad is so big. We know about the issues. More than 30 first-team players that will be lining up at pre-season for Pochettino. They've got a number of centre-backs they signed in the January window and the summer window before, obviously Koulibaly and Benoit Badiashile. Thiago Silva also signed a new deal as well, so it's difficult to see how he would get in the front of those already first-team players. And also Chelsea have an issue in regards to the financial fair play regulation. So obviously they have spent numerous sums of money, over £500 million on transfers this year. There is no Champions League football next year, so they're going to have to drive up their income in other ways, and that's by making a profit on players that are academy players, so they can make a solid profit, because obviously they haven't had to spend any money on bringing them in. So people like Ruben Loftus-Cheek, Mason Mount, and also people like Levi Colwill, Conor Gallagher, people like that as well, are in line for the chopping block, basically. So it looks to me that he could go. I don't think a permanent move for maybe Colwill, because he has such a bright future. I'm sure Chelsea would like to play him somewhere down the line. And I think Colwill would like to play for Chelsea at one point as well. So a loan move probably works out best for everybody. It's what Brighton can afford. It's what Chelsea will be willing to do. And it certainly suits Colwill as well. So, out of all the players that are coming and going out of Brighton this summer, that looks the one that makes the most sense.
Well, going back to Sunday, Pascal Gross equalled Glenn Murray and Neil Maupay's Premier League club record of 26 goals. The German has played in a variety of positions for Roberto De Zerbi, sometimes occupying the wing-back role, sometimes playing in midfield. How important has his versatility been to Albion and De Zerbi this season, Frankie? In my opinion, he's very much an unsung member of this Seagulls side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we spoke a few months ago about how Pascal Gross he's been there for 6 years now, and his versatility and his roles changing throughout the 3 managers he's worked on under has symbolised Brighton's development in the Premier League and growth as a club as he's grown as a player. But currently his versatility, as you said, and his knowledge of the game has been the backbone of Brighton's success. Firstly, when you look at the fact he can play right back, the other 2 right backs haven't been available most of the season. Veltman and Tariq Lamptey have been constantly injured. Tariq Lamptey's been out since March with a knee injury, and Veltman's had recurring issues with various injuries. So the fact that Pascal Gross can play right back has meant that De Zerbi can keep playing a back 4. The back 4 is what he prefers to play. It's what allows him to score the most goals and to be more free-flowing in attack and play his more possession-based style of football. So without Pascal Gross being able to play right back, he wouldn't have been able to do that and would have been in a lot of trouble. And then when he plays central midfield, the fact he can play central midfield again effortlessly and brilliantly means that Alexis McAllister can push forward into the number 10 role, which is the role he prefers to play and has enjoyed playing for Argentina. Again, helping Brighton score a lot more goals in 2023 than they have done the year prior. And it's also helped for the fact that McAllister can play there when Lallana's been injured. Obviously, Lallana was an important player for Brighton under the early reign of De Zerbi in the first couple of months. His injury was a big setback, and De Zerbi said that. But McAllister could fit in there because Gross could play the position alongside Caicedo, who's incredibly important for, Brighton have had players that have dropped off with injuries, throughout the season. Pascal Gross is always there. He's always there. He's always reliable, and he can always play a number of positions. And it's not the fact that he is the standout player. It's the fact that he can do a role so well that other players can flourish. So with people like Lamptey and Veltman being injured, Trossard going in January, Lallana's injury, these players drop out, and it feels like Brighton might suffer. The fact that Pascal Gross can put himself in and fill in these roles means that Brighton will be okay. De Zerbi has said many a time that Pascal Gross's dad was a footballer and is also a coach, and that has, I think, had a massive impact on Gross. He's a leader in the dressing room. He acts like a coach himself. And like I say, that experience, now he's in his 30s, that understanding of all the positions on the pitch, and also the fact he's a very technically sound footballer. That's the other important thing to say, is that we saw his goals this season, the one against Southampton the weekend. He's very technically proficient on both feet, which is obviously what De Zerbi's looking for in a footballer, to play his style of the game. So you would never say Pascal Gross is been the player of the season or is Brighton's best player, but he's certainly one of their most important players in the last 6 years. And like I say, without him, if he had got injured for long periods of time or he wasn't able to play all these roles, Brighton would be nowhere near the top six.
Brighton made sure of European qualification with the draw against City last night. Julio Enciso's rocket earned Albion a point, and on another day, the Seagulls may well have taken all three. You were at the game, Sam. How did you rate Albion's performance against the champions, and how was De Zerbi after the game? He was probably proud as punch, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. He was in fine spirits after the game, and he even said it was probably the best game of the season. And he said that quite a few times, De Zerbi. It seems like every game that goes by is his favourite one, because it's they do seem to be getting better with every game. Last night it was just a culmination of an amazing season, really, and it was obviously built up as a game that maybe didn't have a lot riding on it, with City already champions, and Brighton already basically confirmed the Europa League either way. But you wouldn't have known that really from the performance of Brighton. They were exceptional, and obviously against a team with the quality of Man City, it made for an exceptional game. Both teams really going full throttle to score, and it was 1-1, but it could have been 4-4 in all honesty, with the chances that were both ends. And obviously saw an absolute sensational goal from Enciso, and Welbeck hit the bar. Had the ball in the net, which was ruled offside. Matoma had the ball in the net as well for a handball. So, yeah, it was a really entertaining game that could have gone either way, with Haaland missing a couple of big chances. But just amazing to be there to see two excellent footballing teams go at it, really.
Well, in his pre-match press conference ahead of last night's game, Pep Guardiola likened Roberto De Zerbi to a Michelin-style chef, and said the Italian was one of the most influential managers in the last 20 years. Do you agree with Pep's pre-match comments, Frankie? And do Albion have their own mini Pep in Roberto De Zerbi?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I'd say Pep is known for being very complimentary of rival teams and managers, often bordering on patronising at times. I do remember specifically in his first season as Man City manager, he'd just beaten Bournemouth 5-0 and called Eddie Howe's side the best team he'd played in England, which I remember Eddie Howe not particularly agreeing with for obvious reasons. But you do feel he's being genuine because, firstly, looking at the actual football itself, the style of football, it mirrors very closely what Guardiola tries to achieve with his Manchester City team. It's very attractive on the eye. It's very unique. It's very brave. I mean, the use of the goalkeepers and centre backs to keep the ball and in such dangerous areas and pass out from the back, it is a joy to watch, but also a risky game. Again, something that Guardiola has introduced at Manchester City. But the most impressive thing about it is obviously normally you associate this style of football with the big teams because obviously they have the best players in order to do it. Brighton have some great players, don't get me wrong, but you never associate with a club to do it so successfully from outside the top six or outside the top clubs in Europe. So that's why I think he is giving that praise, and that's why we should probably agree with it, because that's been one of the most impressive parts about it, is that Brighton are playing it rather than someone like Chelsea, Manchester United, Manchester City or Liverpool. And you have to bear in mind what De Zerbi came into. When managers normally come in, they either get the start of the season, so a full pre-season to work with their squad to get their ideas in place, or they're coming in mid-season because the team is doing poorly. Therefore, you are getting rid of all the old managers' ideas because they clearly weren't working, and you implement yours straight away. De Zerbi came in a very odd situation, which the Brighton team was flying.
Yeah.
They'd start the season with 4 wins out of their first 6 games. They were 4th in the league. They'd beaten Manchester United at Old Trafford in the first game of the season. Graham Potter was looking like he was going to have a great season. So it wasn't a normal thing to come into, but De Zerbi has come in. He's managed to keep that momentum and also drip feed his ideas into the side. And as he's grown in confidence in England, with obviously his ability to speak English and understanding the game more, his team has got better and better and better. And so, we've gone from Brighton being a good side, that little old Brighton that could play attractive football and probably stay as a Premier League team, to European challenges. Like if you look from last night, they've scored 71 league goals this season. That's 29 more than last year. That's the 3rd most in the league. They've had 605 shots. That's the most in the Premier League. That's a fantastic achievement against the likes of Manchester City and Arsenal. They've had more shots than them. And they've got the 2nd highest average ball possession per game in Europe behind Manchester City. So he's not only taken over and made sure that Brighton maintained being a top 10 club, which is what they had achieved for the first time last season. He's improved them, which is because I didn't think that would have been possible in 8 months without a pre-season. So you have to say the reason for this is because De Zerbi is a great manager, and that is why Guardiola has given him that praise, because we're seeing not only a brilliant, unique brand of football, but one that is successful very quickly, which is a sign of an exceptional manager. So yes, a mini Pep is definitely what Brighton have.
Well, Albion can look forward to European football next season. Sam, how do you think Albion will be able to cope with juggling participation in 4 competitions next season? Sometimes it's not easy for clubs outside the top 6 to compete in Europe and replicate the great Premier League season that they had before. How do you think Brighton will manage on 4 fronts next season?
They'll definitely need a bigger squad, I would say. I think obviously this season's been good preparation for that, with a crazy fixture schedule, really, with games every few days for a long time now. And Brighton have really suffered as a result, and with lots of injuries. And the fact they've still got to Europe despite that makes the achievement even more incredible, really, with such a small squad and the same players playing most games, really. So definitely, I think if they're going to compete on all fronts next season, they definitely need to have a bigger squad, because it does seem this season that De Zerbi's obviously relied on his main men. So if he has a bigger squad to choose from, it can definitely make a difference. So I'll say that's the main goal. But it does seem that De Zerbi is confident of getting that backing from the owners, and being able to make a big difference in the transfer market. And just being in Europe will hopefully encourage some players to come to the club, really. And even some of the big names to stay. So you never know. Obviously, McAllister and Caicedo being heavily linked, but there's a chance maybe that being in Europe could persuade them to stay and encourage more players to join. And they've obviously been active in the transfer market already, getting James Milner, João Pedro, and Dahoud from Borussia Dortmund all lined up as well. So it's it's looking good in that sense. They get some deals done early. They definitely need to keep that going, get as many players in as possible for next season, I think.
I know this is putting both you and Frankie on the spot here, but what would constitute a good season next season for Brighton? Because the pessimist in me doesn't think that they might be able to hit the same heights as they have this season. Do you agree with that, Sam, or am I being a bit too negative?
Yeah, it's probably easy to agree with you on that, really, because I think this season's been so incredible. It's hard to believe they could replicate it. I think obviously Chelsea and Liverpool have had, and even Spurs have had, obviously really below par seasons, and you would expect them to make improvements next season. Well, definitely in the case of Chelsea and Liverpool, you would think they'd be firing on all cylinders again. Obviously, all the big teams around them are going to be making improvements in the transfer market, so it's going to be tough in that sense. But yeah, obviously with the added pressure of playing more games in Europe, but I think Brighton will just enjoy it, really, just use the opportunity as the first time it's ever happened, and just try and have the best season as possible. And as I say, if you get a few more players through the door, even with the experience of James Milner coming in, signings like that are so important as well for managing the workload, and the experience of European games could be massive. I think just really just enjoying the moment, enjoying the season that's going to come in Europe. I think the fans will absolutely love it.
What about yourself, Frankie?
Yeah, I think the baseline should be a top half finish. Being a realist, because we don't know who's going to leave this summer. We don't know how the squad is going to cope with playing 3 times a week, especially if they don't get out of the group stage. They do have that bulk of games between September and Christmas where they will definitely play 6 group stage games, and obviously their Premier League campaign will have started, as well as their League Cup campaign. So that will sort of set up the season, you would say, and then from 2024 they can establish where they are. I think, as much as I agree with all Sam's points, you expect Liverpool to be stronger next year. Chelsea will also be looking to, you wouldn't expect them to finish 12th again. Tottenham as well. You can't imagine them being 8th next season, or being so far off the Champions League race. But Brighton have, I said at the start of this podcast, Brighton have been known for being hit by setbacks and everyone saying they're done. I mean, before the start of this season, the fact that Cucurella and Basuma had both gone, most people assumed Brighton would have a poor season this year. But the way the club is set up, they plan and prepare for this, and they are very much aware of what the squad needs and how difficult it will be. And also the fact that they need to back De Zerbi, because if they don't, De Zerbi is a very ambitious man and he will probably leave. So the key thing that will stand Brighton in good stead, as I've always said, is keeping De Zerbi, because they have one of the best managers, or one of the most up and coming managers in Europe. So to keep him there will stand them well going into what will be a very, very difficult first couple of months next season. But yeah, I think if after all that happens and all what will be a very busy summer and a very busy first 3 months of the season, if they can finish in the top 10, they'll see that as a success and something to build on as well, and something they can learn from as well.
Well, back in the present, Brighton bring the curtain down on their season with a trip to Villa this Sunday. Can't forget that this campaign has not only seen Albion qualify for Europe, but they also were a Solly March penalty away from the FA Cup final. But with the campaign coming to a close, I'd like to hear your standout and memorable moments from Brighton's historic campaign this season. Start with you, Frankie. Which moment stands out most for you?
Yeah, I've gone for a slightly odd one, but it's the one that really sticks out in my mind. Is when they beat Everton 4-1 in January at Goodison Park. I remember it really well because De Zerbi had obviously come in before the World Cup. I think he'd had 8 games, in 8 league games, and he'd won 2 of them. He went on a winless run of 6. Sorry, it was 9 games he had before Christmas, and he was still unknown about how he would do at Brighton. His English wasn't great. So we weren't really seeing his full personality or his style of play as yet. And obviously it was still over the shock of Graham Potter leaving for Chelsea. So there's still a couple of question marks about how Brighton's season would go. The World Cup happened. They came back. Obviously got knocked out by Charlton in the FL Cup, which was very disappointing for them. Beat Southampton and then were beaten by Arsenal at the Amex. So they were going into that game off the back of, again, a win and a loss, and you were still trying to work out where Brighton were going. And then obviously Evan Ferguson got his first start that night. Sarmiento also started that game. Alexis McAllister was named on the bench for the first time after he'd won the World Cup in the before Christmas, and they completely tore Everton apart. They won 4-1. They were by far the better team. Matoma was on the score sheet. Ferguson got on the score sheet in his first start, and obviously I think Julio and Cisse came off the bench late on as well, and you could really start to see what Brighton were about and what De Zerbi was about, and it really felt that they had something good there. They scored, what must it have been? That would have been 9 goals in 3 games after Christmas. They'd come out the traps quickly. We saw what they were about. We had been told that De Zerbi liked attacking football, and we were beginning to see it. And we were beginning to see who he liked. People like Evan Ferguson. It was exciting to see him playing more football and scoring goals. He scored against Arsenal off the bench, and now he was scoring on his first start. Mitoma, I think that was his 3rd goal in 3 games as well. It was exciting to watch him become an important player in the Brighton side. Leandro Trossard didn't make the squad. And that was the starting of what we saw of De Zerbi laying his mark down and saying that he wasn't going to be pushed around by players. So it was a big statement victory. And obviously later, following that victory, they went on to beat Liverpool twice that month. They beat Middlesbrough 5-1 in the FA Cup as well. And I think a 2-2 draw with Leicester at the end of it. So ended up scoring a lot of goals. Only lost one game to league leaders at the time, Arsenal, and it kicked on what was a very important 2023, which saw them challenge for at one point the Champions League and get into Europe and into the Europa League. So that victory I saw as the moment that I could see that Brighton were going to be all right under De Zerbi, and it was a pivotal moment for all involved.
What was your standout moment, Sam?
For me, I can't look past the win over Southampton. Obviously very recent, but for me that was just an incredible moment, really, just to see Brighton secure European football for the first time in their history, and kind of the outpouring of emotion that you saw after the game from the fans, players, Serbi and all of his coaches. It was just an incredible moment, really, and I feel privileged to be there and part of it and be behind the scenes after the game as well. And even the videos that came out on social media as well of all the players celebrating in the dressing room, really, and just being able to kind of relax and enjoy that incredible achievement, really. As I say, historic moment, and one that I and the fans and the whole club will never forget. But I think other highlights throughout the season include the wins over Liverpool, both in the league and the cup. I think it just kind of laid down a marker, really, those kind of performances that Brighton really meant business this season, and really outplayed Liverpool on both of those occasions. Obviously, they recently beat Arsenal at the Emirates. Massive kind of step forward to Europe, that one, and obviously had a massive say in the title race as well. And even Graham Potter's last game was a massive standout, really. It was obviously a great moment for him to bow out with. It was obviously the 5-2 win over Leicester, and some exceptional goals were scored that day. And I think that helped when De Zerbi first joined, coming off the back of a massive win, having those players such full of confidence and quality. It did really help De Zerbi to settle in the early stages. And obviously, as he's progressed through the season, you've really seen his identity, his style of play. I think he said in his press conference yesterday that it was about February time that really he could see that this team had the possibility of getting to Europe, and he really from then has just excelled, really. The team's just got better and better.
Mark, have you got any standout moments for Brighton Hove Albion this season?
I haven't followed them as closely as Frankie and Sam might have done, but it's funny Sam mentioned the Leicester game there, Graham Potter's last game. Alex and McAllister's thunderbolt goal that could have probably been goal of the season, but ruled out by VAR, but just the stunning strike. But I don't know if that was bettered anyway last night by Enciso. Anyway, I watched the game on Sky last night, and what a strike that was. Just the footage from behind and the seeing the ball. No keeper in the world saving that. It was just incredible. So, yeah, maybe those two strikes, the one that was and the one that wasn't. So, really good. But being at Wembley for the semi-final, although the result was and poor old Solly March missing, just the atmosphere, the Brighton fans outsun the Man United fans all day long. And it was just such a great occasion for those Brighton fans. It was just a shame they couldn't get over the line.
Meanwhile, Brighton skipper Lewis Dunk has finally been rewarded for his brilliant form with an England recall. Three Lions play Euro 2024 qualifiers against Malta and North Macedonia next month. Dunk has just the one England cap to its name, which he earned in a friendly against the US all the way back in November 2018. How pleased are you to see him back in England contention, Frankie? Long overdue and a just reward after a fine season, no doubt.
Yeah, really pleased for him. And as you say, a lot of people see it as long overdue, and rightly so, especially on the back of this season. I think in years gone by, Dunk has been a top defender, but Southgate may have overlooked him due to the fact that he couldn't see him as a great ball playing centre back as what he needed in his England team. We've seen them at the World Cup and Euros. People like Maguire and Stones carrying the ball forward over the halfway line regularly with success for England, and being a pivotal part of why England have got to the Euros finals and the semi-final in 2018. But this season, thanks to De Zerbi, Dunk's ability on the ball has shone through. He's been trusted in a role which, as De Zerbi has said many a time, is the most important in his setup. The centre backs and how the way they play on the ball is how well Brighton attack. If they don't play well on the ball, they're not going to score goals. And Dunk has been trusted in this role, and he's excelled. I think Jamie Carragher tweeted a couple of weeks ago how impressed he was and called him the best centre-back in the league, English centre-back after John Stones. And I think he's absolutely right. And it's credit to Dunk as well, because he can easily get frustrated by the fact that he's seeing players such as Maguire and even Mings before Unai Emery took over, getting into the squad, maybe not playing as much as him, or maybe not playing as well. He was certainly a good defender, just, with the bread and butter basics, defending is as good as them. But he's never really had a chance to shine as like I say, as the modern centre back. People maybe don't think he could do it, but he certainly can. He's excelled at it, and Southgate couldn't ignore it any longer, because Brighton are now a European team. They're currently, as it stands, one of the biggest teams, or one of the best teams in England. And so the national team has to have the best players from the best teams, and that's what Dunk is. So it's a fantastic achievement for him, and rightly deserved. And hopefully, because they are, and this is no disrespect to Dunk, hopefully because they are the smaller nations, he can get a lot of game time in as well.
I might sound slightly spoiled here, but Sam, were you disappointed to only see Brighton represented by Dunk in the England squad? If so, which Brighton player would you have liked to have seen selected by Gareth Southgate?
Yeah, I wouldn't say disappointed. I think it's great to have even one there, really, which is unusual to see, really. I think it's a massive achievement. I think De Zerbi said last night that having Lewis Dunk in the England squad is as big of an achievement as getting to the Europa League. Because he said his job as a manager not only is to help the team achieve, it's also to help his players get to their best, really, the furthest they can go. So having him in the England squad is as big of an achievement as getting to Europe for De Zerbi, which really speaks volumes. But I think if anyone else was to be in the squad, I'd say Solly March has had an amazing season and is possibly unlucky to have so many amazing players in that kind of position ahead of him in the team. But I think otherwise he would have been in there. But obviously he's injured as well at the moment, so that probably didn't help his cause. But De Zerbi also mentioned Jason Steele last night as well as someone who he'd like to see in the lineup at some point. Obviously age is probably not on his side. But yeah, you never know. You never know if he keeps performing at the level he is, he might turn Southgate's head.
Meanwhile, Crawley Town have confirmed their released and retained list ahead of the 2023-24 League Two campaign. 21 players will return for this new season. 3 players remain in contract talks, while 5 permanent members of the squad have departed. You've had a chance to digest the retained list, Mark. Any massive surprises there?
There were a couple in the retained list. I think the fact that Tony Craig and Jake Hesenthaler are still in there. They obviously both went out on loan in the January transfer. Tony Craig to Dorking, Jake Hesenthaler to Woking in National League. They were part of the group with Tom Nichols, Glenn Morris, George Frankham, that weren't being picked, and much to the annoyance of the fans, because it was a time when Crawley was struggling and they had these experienced players sitting there and they weren't playing, and then they were sent out on loan or sold, like Glenn and George were, or released. And they're still there on the retained list. I know they were under contract, but I would have expected some movement with them. And to be honest, they probably will go at some point. We know the owners came out and said about sensitive legal issues was the reason why they couldn't talk about why they weren't playing. So yeah, I'm imagining they will go at some point. I can't imagine they are in Scott Lindsay's plans going forward. The fact that they both went out to National League teams, I understand that they were offered out to other League Two and clubs and that, and no one was interested. So yeah. I imagine, Scott Lindsay doesn't see them as part of his plans going forward. But that's me speculating there. So we'll see. But otherwise, there was no other real surprise. Kwesi Appiah is still in there as well. He went on loan to Colchester, but he picked up an injury, didn't play the last couple of months of the season. So whether he is part of the plans, he was obviously a popular player. He scored a lot of good goals under John Jens. So so there may be 2 or 3 surprises there, but I'd be very surprised if Craig, Hesenthaler, and Kwesi are there come the start of the League Two season next campaign. But it was really good to see Harry Ransom and Nick Cerula have their option exercise of an extra year on their contract. They're they both respectively won the last 2 Young Players of the Year. Harry Ransom this year, Nick Cirillo last year. So it was great to see them. They're both really popular with the fans. Harry Ransom had a real breakout year this year. I mean, he got a chance because of injuries and that to the likes of Dion Conroy, Joel Lynch, etc. But he took his chance really well, and I've loved watching him play this year. So it's great to see him. It'll be good to see Rafiq Khalil and Remy Oti. They've currently still in contract talks. Rafiq, he didn't play a load of games, but when he did, he seemed to make an impact, and he scored a great goal against Salford, I think it was. Remy Oti, second half of the season, was by far Crawley's best player, I thought. I know Scott Lindsay's a big fan, so obviously there's just negotiating there. I expect to see them both there. Roshan Greensall, the other goalkeeper, he was third choice when Ryan Schofield came in on loan in January. I don't know. I don't know enough about him. I don't know how good a keeper he is. I've never seen him play, so who knows? It depends who else they can try and get in as another keeper to support Corey Adai or challenge Corey Adai for the starting spot. But of the players released, Ludwig Franchillet was the only one I was really surprised with. He's really popular. He's such a character and great fun to be around. And I know the rest of the squad love him as well. But obviously not in Scott Lindsay's plans going forward. Ben Wells, David Radari, Jordan Much, Anthony Grant, no surprises there. Much and Grant were brought in. We knew Gladwin was carrying a knock most in. They just needed that experience to come in and help with the midfield. Obviously, once Much got injured and was out for the season, Andy Grant came in. So there's no surprise with those two going. David Radari, we saw him in the Sussex Senior Cup final for Worthing, didn't we, Matt? And
yes, we did.
Did not impress. Did not impress. So I'm not surprised he's not carrying on. He never made an appearance this year. Was out on loan at Dorking and Worthing. So yeah, there's like I say, with the retained list, I'm not surprised by most of them, but I'd expect those Tony Vickers and Tyler Kwesi to probably leave this summer. So and then he needs to bring in 4 or 5 other players to really boost the squad with a bit of quality and a bit of experience. And yeah, looking forward to a better season next year.
Very quickly, were you surprised by the amount of players that will be retained for next season? Because 21 seems like a lot, considering, as you said, that they will probably have to bring players in as well. But that is also taking into account players leaving. What's your take on that amount?
Yeah, I think there's they were a little bit hands tied because of there was a moment just after the WAGMI took over that they announced 10 players had signed new contracts, and they were all 2-year contracts. And I think that so they're going to put into a bit of a corner with the squad this year, because if they don't get rid of a lot of them, they're going to have to pay a lot, and whether they've got the money to pay out people's contracts to release them and that, I don't know. So I think their hands were tied, but yeah, it's certainly a much bigger squad than Scott Lindsay would have liked. I mean, I think you look at most teams, and they normally have around about 9 or 10 at the end of the season once the retained list, the players have been released, and then they can really rebuild that squad again. So there is a lot of players there, and there's a lot of players who I can't imagine will be in Scott Lindsay's plans for next season.
Well, pre-season preparations have also got underway at the Broadfield Stadium. The Reds have confirmed friendlies against East Grinstead Town, Three Bridges, Dover Athletic, Crystal Palace and Bromley. I think Crystal Palace is the only game that they are currently playing at home. Is that correct? I think so.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What do you make of pre-season's friendlies that the Reds have arranged, Mark? I know that there are a few managers who'd rather skip pre-season and get straight into the league action, but I suppose kind of got to do it, haven't you? You can tell how excited I am about pre-season, but what do you make of it?
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it, pre-season? Because last year they had an amazing pre-season and they scored loads of goals and everything, and everybody got excited, and then we saw what happened.
Yes.
So, I mean, they've got, from last year, they've got East Grinstead and Three Bridges again, which is 2 games they always play pre-season. That'll be a good chance to try any trialists out. I mean, last year I think it was East Grinstead 9-0. I think they won.
Yes.
And we saw the likes of Mo Shabar and Jaden Davis come in and really show what they could do at that standard. But as we've seen this year, they haven't made the breakthrough. Jaden Davis had a couple of good games first team Saturday against Fulham when they knocked him out of the Carabao Cup. But Crystal Palace will be the showcase one. It's normally that's the fixture. They have a little family day and reveal their new kit and stuff. So that'll be quite quite a good occasion, I think. I don't know what kind of team Palace will send. So yeah, Bromley's an interesting one because Andy Woodman, their manager, was someone who was had been tipped to be Crawley Town when they had whatever their 5, 6, 7 vacancies they had this year or whenever it was. But they've won the FA Trophy. They beat a little team called Wrexham. They haven't had much publicity recently in the FA Trophy a couple of seasons back. Yeah, so I think Bromley will be a good challenge for them. Bromley, they're always up there in the National League. So it'll be a good test for them. And yeah, Dover, yeah, there's some decent games for them, but it's just a chance for Scott Lindsay to try out his squad. The Palace and Bromley, I think, will be the key ones where you see strong Crawley sides, sort of what might take shape as their first team this year going forward.
Sam, as mentioned, you've also been covering Crawley as well as Brighton this season. Mr. Dunford has already given his summation of the Red season. I think the word tumultuous was used quite a few times, but how would you assess Crawley's 2022-23 campaign?
I'd say probably a roller coaster, to say the least. Yeah, in many ways, it's been a journalist's dream, really, in the sense there's obviously been lots of dramatic moments, managers resigning after 3 weeks and constantly having a new manager at different points. It was always something to report on. And obviously, the debacle with WAGMI and the fans' discontent with them. So there's definitely been some chaotic moments, and it's obviously been a stressful year for fans, avoiding relegation by the literal skin of their teeth. But overall, it ended up being obviously a decent end to a season. I think Scott Lindsay, despite having a depleted squad, managed to settle the ship really and get some points, enough points to stay in the division, and obviously got the players performing at their best really towards the end of the season. So yeah, a good ending to a crazy year really, and just now they really need to build on that and make sure that doesn't happen again. And it'll be interesting to see how the fans react if WAGMI do stay, because obviously there's some people calling for them to leave. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses next year. But yeah, no, definitely decent end to the season. And as I say, Scott Lindsay deserves a lot of credit for the way that he handled the situation.
I'm assuming WAGMI will be staying, Mark, unless something has happened that we're not aware of.
Yeah, I think they will be. A lot of the fans will want them to go because of the way it's sort of all gone this year, but they're not going anywhere. They want to make this work. They want to make this work, and I think with Scott Lindsay in hand, in sort of situ, I think they've got the right person now, and they just got to build on that. But it's all about getting a CEO in who knows League Two. You look. I mean, I made a joke about Wrexham earlier. You watch Welcome to Wrexham. First thing they did was get an experienced CEO, and he knew how to run a football club. And it wasn't a conference CEO; it was a League One, League Two CEO. So that's what they need to do. The CEO, director of football, if they think they need that. If Scott Lindsay thinks he needs a director of football above him, get them in. But they need to be two different people, not like Chris Galley was interim CEO this year and director of football. They need two different people, one running the club, one running the football team, or helping run the football team. And then just leave it for those people to run it. Pump in the money, do the things around the club that have made it better, because they have improved the match day experience. Crowds have improved this year. They lowered ticket prices. So there was some good things. It was just on the pitch that matters. And if they just make those decisions right, yeah, they will. But they're not going anywhere. They're here to stay, and they want to make this work.
Well, for the final time this season, we're going to head over to Steve Bone's score prediction corner. Brighton, Aston Villa. Starting with you, Frankie. We were discussing before the podcast that you think this might be quite a tricky game for Brighton and may not be the dead rubber that most people assume it to be.
Yeah, Villa need the win to confirm Conference League football, and they're at home as well. And that would be an amazing achievement, considering when Unai Emery took over, they were looking in danger of going down previously under Steven Gerrard. So to take them from 15th, I believe they were when he took over, to be on this amazing run and finish with European football next year would be a fantastic achievement. Also, what they will be looking for. I know the owners are very ambitious at Villa Park, and that's why they appointed someone like Unai Emery, who has won European trophies, multiple European trophies before. So that will be an essential part of keeping him, is playing European football next year. So they'll be checking and searching for the win. They've had a full week off as well. Brighton have obviously played last night, and I can imagine the celebrations would have been quite intense. So they may be carrying a couple of hangovers, as well as a few broken bodies as well from what has been a very tough last 2 months. So it does scream, especially after what we saw against Newcastle, what we saw against Forest and Everton as well. I think that could be a quite high-scoring affair for Villa. So I'm going to say a 3-0 Villa win.
Sam, how do you see that one? Oh, you'll be going, won't you, on Sunday?
I'm due to be going on Sunday. Looking forward to a stadium that I've never been to before. But yeah, obviously it's a game that Brighton have literally nothing to play for. So as Frankie says, it does point to a Villa win. I think maybe a bit closer. I think I'd say it'd be a 2-1 to Villa, I'd say. I think the form Brighton are in, and you think maybe just one last push to end on a high, obviously to appease the travelling fans. I'll say 2-1 Villa, and they'll confirm their place in the Europa Conference League, regardless of what Spurs do against Leeds. And obviously, some fans have been joking that they'd rather Aston Villa get to that final spot than Tottenham anyway, due to what happened at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium a few weeks ago. But I don't think there will be anything like that involved. And Brighton will want to end the season on a high and try and put in the best performance as possible. So yeah, I think it'll be a good game.
Mark, how do you see that one going?
I agree with Frankie. I don't think it'll be 3-0, but maybe 1 or 2-0. It's funny, last week when we were talking about managers of the year, the nominations, and I know Unai Emery was in the list, but we didn't really talk about him last week. But as Frankie suggested there, he's done an incredible job at Aston Villa. Like you said, they look like they could have been dragged into it. If Gerrard was there for any longer, they would have been dragged right into it. So I think they will win. They get the job done this week. Like you say, Brighton, it doesn't really matter. De Zerbi will want to finish on a high, but I think Aston Villa have got something to really play for, and I think they will get the job done against Brighton. But but the relegation zone looks interesting this week, doesn't it, as well? So
yes,
I don't know if you don't mind me, Matt, asking who people think is actually going to survive and who's going to go down.
Well, I'm going to phrase it the other way. Who do people want to go down? Starting with you, Frankie.
Well, it's funny, the Brighton Aston Villa game. Obviously, both of those managers, Emery and De Zerbi, I think Emery was appointed in October, but they were appointed around the same time, the start of the season. And it shows what happens if you're going to sack a manager in the middle of the season or during the season. You better have a good replacement in place. So De Zerbi, an upgrade, Unai Emery, an upgrade, hence why they've both been challenging for Europe at the end of this season. You look at someone like Leicester, they had someone in Brendan Rodgers, who is a top manager, who was struggling with various issues of recruitment and an ageing squad. They got rid of him midway through the season and replaced him with Dean Smith, which is a crazy decision in my eyes. I think they'll go down, deserve to go down for such poor decision making. And the same with Leeds. Jesse Marsh, I understand, maybe not have been everyone's favourite manager and sort of riled up a number of Leeds fans. Okay, you're going to get rid of him. Who are you going to bring in? Because you are really struggling at the bottom half of this table. You need a firefighter manager, someone of a Roy Hodgson or Sam Allardyce, as they eventually got to. They appointed Javi Garcia, which is absolutely crazy. And that makes no sense from a logistical standpoint. This is why a team like Nottingham Forest has stayed up. They stayed with Steve Cooper, who knows the squad, knows the club. He managed to get them over the line, whereas Leeds have left it for Sam Allardyce 4 games to go. So for merely the stupid decision making of the board, I hope Leicester and Leeds go down.
Blimey. Sam, who would you like to go down? Everton are also in the mix. Do you think under Sean Dyche they'll do enough to stay up? I must admit, I don't know who they've got in the final game of the season, but do you think they'll do enough to stay up?
Bournemouth.
Yeah, Everton have got Bournemouth. Yeah, Bournemouth are home for Everton. So I think against the Bournemouth side that have already secured their safety, I think Everton might get the points they need. I think obviously with the crowd behind them, which obviously leaves Leicester and Leeds to go down. And I agree with Frankie really that both teams have made some shocking decisions throughout the season. And I think Leicester recently lost 5-3 to Fulham in a kind of must-win game, and conceding 5 goals in a must-win game just sums up their situation really. And same with Leeds, defensively haven't been good enough. And even Sam Allardyce, who was obviously known for great escapes, wasn't able to save them. So, I think Leicester and Leeds are both doomed at the moment, unless something crazy happens on the last day.
Mark, who do you think will go down, and who would you like to go down if you have any particular preference?
They're the same thing. I think Everton will stay up, and I would prefer Everton to stay up over those two. And again, just echoing the reasons Frankie said, some shocking decisions there. And I mean, you got the likes of Richard Keys who pipe up during the season, or you should get Sam Allardyce in, you should do this and all that. And when you've got when somebody makes a decision not based on what Richard Keys says, but agrees with Richard Keys, get Sam Allardyce in, I think. Yeah, you deserve to go down. But Leeds fans are quite light-hearted and they take things in good spirits, so I'm sure they won't be offended by what we said.
On another note, I do believe that Saturday is the Championship playoff final, so I'll extend it a little bit more. Who would people rather have in the Premier League, Coventry or Luton?
Luton would be the most romantic story, coming from the conference 10 years ago, obviously the famed stadium being a throwback stadium. It's a phenomenal achievement they even got to the Championship itself, let alone the playoffs, let alone the final. So to complete that magical story would be amazing. And I think it'd be a fantastic thing to watch these multimillionaires turn up to Kenilworth Road next year. So I really hope they do go up.
Mark, you were quite keen on Luton going up by the sound of it.
Yeah, I'd just like to see all those Premier League fans go through that gate of terraced houses that go in. It's amazing. Love it. And 5 years ago, both Coventry and Luton were in League Two with Crawley Town, playing against Crawley Town. It's just a stop. But I mean, I don't mind which one goes up, but obviously, Luton is, I think, the more fairy tale. Coventry have been there before. I remember Darren Huckabee tearing it up for Coventry in the Premier League and that. So I want to see someone from Luton tear it up in the Premier League now. So just such a great story.
Be the next Mustafa Hadji or someone like that. Sam, is it going to be a Luton clean sweep? Do you want Luton in the Premier League instead of Coventry?
Yeah, clean sweep. I would agree. Yeah, Luton would be a fairy tale story really from where they were when I first started covering Crawley games. Luton were up against Crawley, so it's absolutely incredible that they're this close to getting to the Premier League, really, and it gives teams like Crawley a bit of hope that you never know what can happen in a few years. So yeah, definitely Luton, I'd say.
Well, with your
not enough orange in their
Sorry, I was just going to quickly jump in. Just say, with your expertise of covering Crawley, all three of you, Carlisle versus Stockport County, who do you think deserves it the most out of those two teams to get up?
I think most people would like Carlisle to get promoted on travel alone, but
purely on that.
But it's the same.
No, but I think Carlisle they've been up there for a few years now, so they've always challenging in and around the playoffs and that. And I think they deserve. I mean, Stockport have done incredibly well. Again, they're a team that came up from the National League last year. So, and I can imagine Wrexham having a similar season to Stockport, if not better, next season. Notts County will do well next season. But yeah, Stockport have had an incredible season. But let's let them work a bit harder to go up. Let's not just do it in the first season. Let's put in the hard yards like Carlisle have. I'd like Carlisle to go.
Did Stockport finish above Carlisle today? Or
I think Stockport finished fourth, I want to say.
Fourth, yeah. I think on that basis alone, I'd say Stockport they finished higher. I always like the team to finish higher to win. I find that more fair. But
just funny that Salford City aren't in it. I think that's what most people are pleased about. Although you can almost guarantee that Salford City against Wrexham will be the only televised League Two game Sky show next year.
Absolutely.
Insufferable, but we shall wait and see.
Gary Neville and Ryan Reynolds having fun.
We will see. But anyway, I think we should wrap up this bumper episode. Thank you very much for your time, as ever, chaps. You can catch up with all the latest sports news, covering everything we have talked about today, including Aston Villa against Brighton and Hove Albion on Sunday, which Mr. Morton will be at on sussexworld.co.uk/sport. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you all next week.